Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream. I'm getting things together here. I've got some code open. I've got other things going on. You may notice behind me, this is the E3D tool changer system. I've been building it with Lou, and we're going to have it together soon. We've just got to get some Bowden tubes and some long skinny pieces of spring steel to hold the tubes in place. But otherwise, yeah, it's mostly together. And I probably have to print a few more parts as well. We're just taking it slowly because we want to do it right, and you know, just taking it easy. So anyway, the subject here is the last few sessions have all been about doing M166 gradients, mixing, all that stuff that Geeetech implemented in 118 for the A10 and A20Ms, the multi-material printing, and we went through and implemented the menus and the G-code and any of the supporting code which is in the mixing class, and we made a gradient object and did all that stuff. And then we did some testing, got it basically working. The main problem was initially the wrong pins for the LCD on the graphical display. From what I hear, what I've posted so far is working on A20M, but it's got some issues on A10M. So I'm just going to review what I've done so far, give it a retest, and just see where we're at. So that's going to be the start. So let me go to my debug session here, and we'll switch over. So I'm just in the middle of cleaning up some code that needed cleaning up. So let me just finish this up. What I'm doing here is just a little, I'm in the menu code now. So if you're familiar with the menu code, if you've seen this all before. And what I'm doing is making a little shorthand here for if card open, just to make it easier to call. If not card, oops, I guess I should say card open. There we go. Right, if not card open, and is that it for the main menu? I think so. Yeah, one more. There. And then as far as card detected goes, we'll do that too. And yeah, I figure this will be just a teeny bit smaller when you have more items in the menu, fewer calls to that function, and we just store these bools in some registers. So otherwise, let's see what else is going on. Card detected and not card open. Okay, good. I guess that logic can't be simplified, so I just wanted to clean this up and make it a little cleaner. So let's update menu main with, oops, why do I have that there? That's silly. I pulled it over just to use it, but now it's gone. Okay, so we got all our bools. We're good. You know, sometimes I like to do this just because it's less redundant. And look, thanks, Lou.
Hey.
Food. All right, thanks, man. I had no idea this was happening, and I knew I smelled something. Yeah. All right then. Well, let's get on with the next bit. So, save this, commit it, and we'll be done. Yeah, I was actually looking through the menus just to see if there was, I know there's a new menu item that keeps popping up, like print continue or something. I don't know why it's there. Recent addition. So let's just make sure that's all good. Oh geez, what did I break? Something I forgot. Okay. Well, since I don't know what that's about, I'll come back to it later. Let's get straight on to M166. So this is the good part here, is I can actually show you the changes in a nice, neat format using GitHub Desktop. So I can show you the changes we did finally end up making. The final changes were we added a thing called gradient mix to the configs. And this is a typical thing you'll do for any new feature. And then I added some configurations for A10M and A20M, and those contain those settings and use them. Then I migrated the settings over. So these are actually default configs here, and then these are actually the migrated settings. So I brought over the changes basically to those configs so that I could see them separately from the rest. We then have the A20M settings, same idea. And then we have the gradient mix feature itself. And this is everything. This is all the important stuff. So again, gradient mix goes into the main config and the default config, which I usually put in with the feature implementation itself. Hey, how's it going, everybody? I see people are joining me. That's good. Good evening, everyone. So the next part was, of course, we have to have some language strings to support the messages we're going to have. So we have a bunch of these. And these start and end are just kind of like set up that way to line up with each other. But they don't necessarily have to. So then we implemented, and these are pretty elaborate. But for the most part, let's see if I could sum up. Let's sum up, so you get an idea of what's involved here. So the first thing I did was I added a little mixer normalized debug flag, so we can debug stuff if we want to. And then I have a little extra bit added on here. And yeah, I wish this was a bit bigger too. I agree. I wish the resolution was smaller. It would be nice to be able to make it larger so you can read it better. I could presumably, I could make it dark and that would make it uglier, but yeah, I think the better way would be to, like, if I want to show you this stuff, I'll show it to you in somewhat better detail in the web browser. So let's go to the M166 here. There it is. And we'll look at it in the browser where we can zoom better. So let's jump to that file, which is mixing, and get a little insight here into how we do GitHub stuff. Very handy. I wouldn't be able to do this stuff without the help of GitHub. So what are we looking at? We have, all right, so mixer normalizer debug comes up first, and we'll just zoom that up. That's a little debug flag. Then yeah, as I was saying, here we usually use 16-bit only in the case when we're using non-AVR processors, which are typically a lot faster. So we can use bigger numbers. I just thought it might be fun to try it out when I'm using the dual mixing extruder to use the bigger numbers and maybe get slightly more accurate gradients and stuff, because it'd be slightly more granular. But didn't seem to be needed. Once I got the calculations working, it seemed to be fine working with either 8-bit or 16-bit. So anyway, that's the only reason that's there. And then we have, I changed the name of mixer color T to comp T, which stands for component, because actually, even though, yeah, sure, each filament has a color, I'm kind of thinking of the mix as a color and the each filament coming in, or each channel as a component. So we have that. Then we have, my dinner's gonna get cold, sorry guys. we have a bunch of stuff here. This stuff is like, it's hard to tell sometimes when things are being moved or replaced, but basically what's happening here is there is something called retract sync mixing, and let's imagine that it's all still there, and I think it is. Yeah, it's down below. So this gets moved down below. But I created something called a mix tool enumerator, which just basically tells you what the numbers of each mix tool is, including certain special ones. There's a special one called, let's see, an auto retract tool. And of course the purpose of that is to have a 50-50 mix so that it retracts both filaments at the same time. And then I was going to have maybe like a gradient tool. That's a thought for another implementation you might do, and that could come later. So then we skip over this stuff which was already there, retract sync mixing. And then we get down to the mixer stuff that's populating some block fields. So a few of my changes get popped in there, and you can kind of see it's not much different. I just changed some spacing and mixer color changed to mix comp. We created a gradient structure to store all the gradient info. This might make a fine class, but it started out as a structure just because it doesn't really need to be a class, and it does share some things with Mixer, so it seemed good to just have it be a structure for now. But in a class, you would just add methods, and I believe with C++, you can even add methods to structures. So you could throw, like, you know, methods, functions, functionality inside of that gradient, but I've moved it all into the Mixer. So some of the things that change in Mixer are, I changed the name of one of the variables called M166 collector. I just called it collector because who knows what the code might be in the future. Or M163 collector, I guess it's called. So this is just the collector where it's picking up the mixes, the mix components, which it later normalizes and produces a final color from. Then we, of course, we do some init. There's stuff for initting. Then I have some extras thrown in, like a function to, or a method to reset the virtual tools to their initial values, which can be useful. So that's an option that I wanted to add to the menu. So that's now added to the menu as well. An option to refresh the collector, which basically just, what does it do? It, I believe it does the, I don't think it does the normalization. Let me do a quick peek and see if I can recall what it does. This is something I added just the other day. So yeah, refresh collector does a, yeah, essentially it does do a normalize on the collector from the color. So I think the idea is that it's taking the color that you have in a virtual tool, and then it's bringing that info over to the collector from either the current virtual tool or one that you specify. The idea being that if you need to edit a virtual tool, you should grab the colors, put them back in the collector, modify the collector, normalize the collector, and back in. And that's there because I added direct mixing of the components into the menu as another extra option, which would always show up if you had more than 2 channels of mixing. But with 2 channels of mixing, by default, you just get the Geeetech style, where it just edits one component, the other one's always the reciprocal, or 100 minus that component. So there's only ever a need to modify one. When you have 2 or more, it gets trickier because you have to modify each and every one of them and decide, I want this one to be 5, this one to be 3, this one to be 2, and then when you normalize them, that 5, 3, and 2 gets added together, and they each get divided by that. So that's how the components end up working. But in the meantime, you do have to have this collector, and so I'm using it during the mixing editing in the menu, in addition to as part of M163. So if you're in the middle of doing M163 stuff, you wouldn't want to mess with the menus, because it would then they would cross interfere with each other. But in general, you're only doing one at a time, so it's not a big concern. So that's there. So now we have set the collector, and of course this just sets a single component. This used to be set M163 collector. And then we have our normalize, and we have one for normalizing the selected V tool, one for normalizing, nothing. And this could be done using a default on here. I could say tool index equals selected vtool. That's actually legal in C++, even because what happens is it just takes what you put here, and if it's an initializer, it sticks it into the body of the method. So it just treats it like it's inside the body. So that's basically all that does. And if you did send another number, it would, use the other one instead. So could use a default there instead. So C++ heads, I know, it's just, I don't remember, the original author who went through and changed all this had a philosophy of, if it takes an optional argument, make two methods. And my feeling on that is, like, this is just, it's going to end up being the same. So it's better to just make a single method, give it a default, and if it happens to be, one of your member variables or something, that should be fine. So that's one thing I could conceivably change. Small thing, but worth mentioning. Then, of course, you can get the selected vtool. This is just a getter, an accessor, and it's not particularly needed, except that selected vtool, I think, used to be private. It might still be. I think I might have made it. It would be, the alternative would be to make it public, so anything can get it, or make a friend declaration so friends can get it. Then we have, of course, tool change. When you're changing a tool in virtual tool land, this is how they work. That was originally there. I just kind of cleaned it up a little. I think I made it so that it turns off the gradient when you select a tool. Now, this is where we get to the question of alternative implementations and should the gradient be a virtual tool, and how would that work? How would you basically treat it? I'm not entirely sure. I think when you see how the gradient is implemented as we go down, there's some aspects of that I think could be, I don't know, M166 is a nice self-contained command for specifying the whole gradient, but you could conceivably say, well, it already has, you already have a mix, which is your current mix tool, so why, and you say, I want the gradient mix to be this mix, and it'll go towards that. That's a possibility, but I thought it was important, it felt important that if you had a gradient going, that after it was done, it would revert back to whatever your previous tool selection was. Because a gradient isn't a mix, it's it's an option, it's a dynamic thing. So it's an interesting question how to go with that. But for now, it is all encapsulated in the one bundle, and we're not requiring, first set your tool, then set your gradient destination. It's all in one, which to me makes the most sense. But if you want, I could see where, you could say, still have it all be a part of M166, but have M166 actually modify the current tool. I don't know, I'm not too fond of it. The one thing about having them be treated as virtual tools is that if you were in your slicer and you wanted to switch to a gradient from a solid color, it would know to go to the wipe tower and extrude on the wipe tower. And that's the main difference. It would extrude on the wipe tower until your color was changed, and then it would move over. So if you wanted a very stark transition, it would make sense, it would make the most sense to make the gradient itself be a virtual tool. So it may be something like, maybe if I say T100, is gradient, or, I would want to have it be some consistent number, not just, or if you were adding a color or defining a color, you would define it as a gradient. I mean, that's kind of what you're doing with M166. The only thing being is that there's only one of them at any time, and you don't save it. And if you did have to save it, it would end up being, you'd have to reserve space for all those gradients and extra fields that you might or might not ever use, and it just ends up using up more SRAM that, again, we don't have a lot to spare. So I'm trying to keep it down to the minimum for this implementation. So there's some different ways it could go, for sure. So anyway, we go to stuff that was already there, stepper setup, which copies the color to the block color for the block. And that's basically the mix in terms of fancy binary numbers. And then we have the if dual mixing or a gradient mix. So these are the things that are shared between the new feature, or they're shared between the case where you have two channels or the case where you're doing gradients. So we do need mix in the case of either, because the gradient uses mix as a temporary scratch area. I could use the collector probably, but the collector is, let me see, it's int16. Is it also int16? I think the collector might be float. I believe it is. Yeah, it's float. So it's kind of a, even though I'd be storing integers in those collector values, I'm not sure how I don't know. Interesting question whether to keep the mix or just use the collector. It would save some bytes. Let's put it that way. 4 of them anyway. So here we're copying the mix to the color. So these felt important. You'll remember that I wanted to have a general thing to just copy a mix to any color that you had. So it does that. It did some debug. I'm using loops for everything instead of any kind of mem copy, just because size of is too much. It's too weird sometimes. A size of an array passed to a function or method is not the size of the array total size. It's just the size of the pointer, even if you specify the size of the array in the argument. And so it's pointless to use size of when referring to arguments unless, so I don't know, there's other ways to go about this. So we now have update mix from vtool. Okay, so here we've got updating the mix from the virtual tool. Very straightforward. A little math. Converting from, whatever the scale happens to be, C tot gives us that. And then we take the reciprocal, so we always have the reciprocal. So this is a case clearly where it must be a dual mix thing. And I think actually if I were to look at update mix from vtool, I'm going to find, like how often did I use it? It's used, let's find out where. Okay, it's used on a init. If there's a dual mixing extruder. Right, so this looks like it, I'm assuming it's only going to be used in the case of a dual mixing extruder. So as we go down, we'll see, but wait, here's a case where it's not. We're refreshing the gradient, and so this is a case where refresh gradient is dependent on gradient, and that's used in all the places where a gradient is edited. So anytime you edit a gradient, you'll find that refresh gradient is called after something has been changed. And it just updates the mix so that it ends up being reflected in the UI. So in this case, we're refreshing it there. We're refreshing it when we end the Z, when we change the Z's, and we refresh when we change either the V tools. So those are the places where the gradient gets altered and it updates the mix for the gradient at that same time. And so if there's an option to edit the mix, then it'll be updated by that. So, okay, so those are the only places that it seems to be called. Yeah, I keep going through this and hoping I can basically get it to all work with multiple channels, but there's some aspects that are hard to do. Let's see. Certainly the display, of course. And the main thing is that the dual option, or the dual conditional that it uses, what did I call it? Dual, right, I called it dual gradient, dual mixing extruder. Okay, so yeah, if this pops up, yeah, this basically should, its main effect should only be that it allows the mix to be displayed on the status screen. That's about it. Other than that, and then of course to be edited in a single way. apart from that, it shouldn't affect any other types of behaviors. So, but the reason that I have things like update tool from Mix on it and stuff is just, I wanted to very much have, again, explicitly express the dependencies, what's being used where, because, you know, in the future, there's going to be cleanup, and I want to make sure everything is clear as to where things go and what they belong. And so let's move on to the next bit. So we've got things like update vtool from mix, same idea. Update gradient for Z, so this is where the actual gradient mixing stuff happens. This is where all the magic happens. When the planner goes, let's see, from one layer to another, or anytime it gets a block, it comes to this section of code and it checks to see if it should update the gradient for the planner Z. And actually find that down here. All I do is update gradient for Z, planner, get axis position, etc. And then it does things like checks to see whether the Z has gone over the end, if the gradient is even enabled. You know, when is it called? It's you know, it's called when refresh gradient is called. It's called because, you know, if you've modified the gradient, you might as well have the latest one reflected on the screen. If you've updated the gradient for the Z, right, so when we look at update gradient for Z, that only gets called if the Z is actually changed. So that was one. You will get a case where if there's like Z hops and stuff while it's doing things, you'll get this sort of thing. This Z will actually recalculate the gradient during hops. You can't do much about that. I suppose I could do if only update the gradient when there's an E move and Z is changed, so that's a possibility. But I would have to, again, go and I'd have to add that as more logic, so we may do that. We'll see. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Going back to where I were. Okay, so gradient control basically does all that. It then automatically goes to NZ, and then when it's done, it sets the gradient to its end V tool, basically making the current color that tool. So it actually does modify the current tool selection. So if you specified a starting tool and an ending tool, it doesn't change the starting tool at the start, but it does change to the ending V tool. So if you go from 0 to 1, when you're done, your tool 1 will be the selected tool. Maybe it would be better to go back to whatever the tool was before the gradient started. Basically just not change to end V tool, but just leave it alone. In essence, if gradient enabled, I would say gradient enabled equals false. You know, NZ is greater than NZ, then gradient enabled equals false here instead. So that's an option. But for now, it just changes to the next tool. It's a question of what you tend to expect. What do you expect? What would you want to happen? How would you want gradients to behave? In terms of alternative implementations, as I mentioned, could make it so that it does actually go from one tool to another tool. You could make it a tool in itself, which probably will end up happening in some regard. I think what may happen is it'll just end up being a special T number, like T100 is gradient, and when you do T100, it's not much different from turning the gradient on. The main reason, of course, it's there is really just so that your slicer will do the right thing. It'll know that it needs to make a wipe tower. So other than that, internally, it could be done so many different ways. So here we have update the mix from the gradient, and again, the math is very simple. Add up the total, get the convert to 100 scale, and then get the inverse or the difference there. Finally, refresh gradient. This is used after a change. It just checks to see whether it should be enabled or not, because gradients that don't go anywhere or don't change are not really gradients. And then I do a little mix backup. I copy the mix to the backup. And then I use the mix as a scratch area. So I update from the start V tool and I copy that to my start mix. I get it from the end V tool, make an end mix for that. And then I update the gradient based on the current Z. And then I restore the mix from the backup. And that's it. And then the last thing it does is sets the previous Z to -1 so that it's guaranteed that on the next Z move it'll make a change in the gradient. So there here I'm just pulling void out because I don't know why. It just we don't tend to use void in C++, and so that's the reason. And then I'm doing a little endless loop, changing it from do while true to for forever. Then that's pretty much it for the header. And C++ files is just above it. So let's hide that. Boom. And take a quick look at the logic in our C++ mixing file. So again, same kind of stuff, doing some initialization here. Equals zeros are redundant, so we could comment those out. The bootloader will clear RAM for us. So here again, comp t changes. Here's our mix with mixing steppers, and again, it's used for both. And I am using, even though there are only some cases where it's using 2 channels for display, I am, of course, using as many mix channels as there are mixing channels and steppers. So then we have finally normalize. So normalize just does I did a little optimization of normalize, changing the collector, a little change in the debug output, and here a little tweak to the way that again, collector is being multiplied. Here I'm just doing a little extra calculation in front so that in the loop it doesn't have to do as much. Then we have a little change in the debug. Here I've got reset vtools as an addition where I'm borrowing parts of init are in there, and then init calls reset vtools. So again, originally stuff that used to be in init is now here. I did change if this is greater than instead of this is less than, just because virtual tools is the subject here. And I tend to like to refer to the subject of the query first. The question is it greater than mixing steppers? And if it is, then great. You can use it. This is where we build in we go to the things beyond the automated. Tool 0 is E0, tool 1 is E1, etc. So then we have our init. Last thing, let's see, update gradient for planner Z is done. Whenever resetting the vtools, we do that just because if it's using tool 0 to tool 1, those colors have changed. Now the gradient must change if it's using them. Finally, collector gets changed here. Update mix from vtool inside init. Yep, same idea. Want to have the mix be initialized when needed. And I guess here I should say, because there is a mix, I could probably have this be in both cases, if dual mixing extruder or gradient, since they both use it. So, and again, let me double check, make sure I have it defined for both. Yes, I do. Okay, good. So. Back to here. So refresh the collector. Same idea. We get the proportion. Here I'm just, again, I did some extra calculation to make it quicker in the loop. Finally, we enable the gradient mix. And so this is all the stuff that depends on gradient. Things like the gradient itself, of course. We keep a previous Z for it. I could stick that in the gradient structure, but I decided that maybe there's some reasons for the mixer to keep it for other mixer stuff. And again, finally, the update gradient for Z, if it's not equal to the old Z, then we can continue, and then we save the new Z. We get how far into the gradient we are. That is to say the percentage. We make sure it's between 0 and 1, because who knows, this could be called by some errant robot outside the gradient range. And the idea will be above the gradient, it just is the final gradient color. Below the gradient, it's the initial gradient color. So then we do that, copy mix to color, and voila, update gradient for Z. The planar Z is here, so that does that. Pretty straightforward. All that stuff is there as support. Now if I go to my power loss recovery, you can see all it's doing here is saving and restoring the gradient info inside of that structure. So that's all here, and we'll just pass on that. Okay, so the M163 to 165 stuff pretty much stays the same. We do a normalize on the tool index given. Otherwise, if there isn't one given, it uses the current tool and normalizes that. And the loop, in the loop we check to see whether we should set the collector to 0 or not. Okay, and then we normalize at the end. So pretty straightforward stuff in there. I believe that is part of, yeah, that's part of M164, I think, where it normalizes and commits the mix. So we have that. So all these parts are in there to support it, and then the M166, we're echoing some our T and our Z, that is our info. We got these little helpers. Then we have the defined M166. So you've seen this before if you've been watching this series. It hasn't changed much. We just get the start Z, end Z, start V tool, end Z tool, end V tool. Check to see whether it should be enabled. Refresh the gradient. If it's definitely still enabled, then it says on and tells you what the start and end are, and it tells you what your Z are and your Z is, and it even tells you what your current mix is. So all these things are included in the gradient output now. So it makes it a little easier to get a sense of your status. So you just type M166 return, and it'll tell you, you know, where it's at in its current state. Very straightforward. Okay, there it is, getting called, defined, described, all that. You do have a dual mixing extruder. You do if mixing steppers is 2. Here, gradient requires 2 or more mixing virtual tools. Just a little sanity. So typically in a feature, you'll always have some kind of sanity checks for your options or your sub options. Here we finally have the Ultra LCD character version, and all it does is just prints the gradient on the screen, or it prints the mix on the screen, either one. And then not much else, just a little tweak of my spacing here. And if we go down, we're also going to see the same equivalent for the dog LCD, and you can see here it's a little slightly different because I modified how it draws the axis value. I just moved some code out of there, but the main stuff is the same. You move to some position, set up a string, print it, done, or we print the axes. Okay, so all that works. The language strings that support everything are here, shown before. And main menu now gets a mixer menu thrown in. I probably will move it somewhere else. It's at the top now for convenience. Then we have the menu itself, and this is maybe the most interesting and nifty part. Certainly most readable, because almost everything is, at least the important parts are menu item, just menu item. Here's some menu item stuff. So the gradient mix stuff needs to have some extra support, so I made a little start edit method and an end edit method. And all of these things do all the stuff that you would need to do as part of editing. So for example, you want to defer your screen so you're not going back to the status screen in the middle of trying to edit, or if you walk away. It sets it to the encoder multiplier, turns that on for you, does some other stuff, checks to see if the encoder is changed. If so, it modifies the value, checks to see if it should draw, and then draws this does a custom drawing. That's one of the reasons for this is these are actually these are menu screens, but they're unusual in that they don't, have like start menu, end menu. I guess they're not really menu screens. They're screens, and this is how you do a screen. You just call call and draw whatever you want. When you're doing menus, you use the menu methods, but you can pretty much do whatever you want. So that's how we do things like when you're doing the mesh leveling and you're checking your points and it's drawing the points, all very nicely done in a function that just, arbitrarily draws pixels as it wants. It's nice to have that freedom with the graphical display. So we have that, start edit, end edit. Of course, none of that fancy stuff is here. All we do is just print custom strings, including, in our case, the start Z and the end. Also, I think lower on the screen, I might print the mix that it pertains to, or the channel. I know on the A10, A20M version I did originally, in the 118 version. It'd be nice to have some of that stuff. I've been thinking of augmenting these edit screens a bit more. So those are there in this one. Then your ending edit, same idea. If it should draw, refresh gradient, go to previous screen. When you're done, if it's clicked, it refreshes the gradient. Then we have the actual gradient menu where we're editing it. Here's your start V tool, edit it. Yep, you can go from 0 to this number and you can refresh the gradient. When it's done, it'll refresh it automatically. It's built in. Here we have temp strings. So here we're doing menu item add-ons, which I needed to make for this feature. We never had them before, but we needed to have an ability to just do custom drawing inside of a menu item after it's been displayed. So that's what this does. First display the menu item, here's the basic string, and then you can print more stuff after, like starting from character 9, for example. Although I'd probably do something more like Starlin, what did I do? Something more like Sterlin. I thought I was typing, but I'm in the wrong screen to do that. Let's go to the end. Menu, there you are. Yeah, so I might do like Sterlin of that instead, and then you know exactly where to put it. That way, if the language changes, you can draw it differently. But for now, it's in a fixed position. So yeah, it's just the way it is now. So where were I? Oh, here I are. Right, so that's what that does. Just prints a little extra stuff there. Here's your start Z, and then all that. And it prints it as, with some fancy math. Anyway, that is, that gradient menu does. It allows you to, it displays them, and then when you click those will go to submenus, and specifically the start edit and end edit menu item or screens. So then we have some more support stuff. This is a little method that will be called by one of the menu items down here when you select a V tool. And it's, this one is, it's not non-dynamic. It actually has to go to a separate screen when you edit, come back, and so what it does here is it selects the tool once you've finished your selection. It actually does the tool selection, and that gets reflected on the screen. LCD mixer cycle mix, of course, is used for cycling the mix. I wrote a little routine. All it does is checks the mix. So if you had a mix that was 8 components or whatever, let's just say 3, you'll start with, just component 1 and not 0, not the second one and not the third one. Then you'd have just the second one. Then you have the first and the second one. Then you have just the third one. Then you have the first and the third. Then you have the second and the third. Then you have the first, second, and third. And then it goes back to the first again. And I don't have it cycled to 0 because a mix of 0 is pointless. You shouldn't do it. That's all that does. It does a little refresh of the mix. And then when you're done and you're ready to commit it, it does that. This is all part of editing the mix. Then we have channel mix editing. I actually added an option, a hidden option called channel mix editing, which normally is anytime you have more than 2 mixing steppers, it's automatic. But if you don't, then if you want to test it, as I did, I need to add this feature, so make it a flag. I'm getting the printer started, so we can take a look at some of this stuff in action. And we'll confirm with 1Z Radio whether it's working properly on the A20M or not. Okay, let me bring up the Arduino IDE. Okay. I've already got it flashed on there, so I can just connect, and we'll just start with a little M166 and ask where we're at. It's off. All right. Oh, that didn't work either. Let me do a little home first to make sure everything's good. Forgot, it's S1 to turn it on. It's, remind me again, what's N166? How does that work? Oh, right, AZIJ. Okay, yeah. I0J1A1B. I don't know. We'll just go with A0 to B20, just to make it easy, or Z, sorry. Copy. Okay, there we go. Start Z0 T0, go to end Z20 T1, current at Z0. Now if I go, and my screen says GR100 semicolon 0, which I could show you, but I won't. And then if I say G1Z10, I should get, okay, mix on, current. Oh, look at that. Totally wrong. Yeah, so something got lost. It was working, I swear. So something got lost here. Let me double check and see what's going on with that. How did I get lost here? Let's go to our debugging feature and turn that on, and we'll get lots of extra output and see what's happening. So, mix normalizer debug, and then real quick, go to the gradient control, I think it's called. Yeah, gradient control, and I'll just put it here. If gradient enabled, etc., update gradient for Z. So let's just do gradient control. Oh, I don't know, for Z. Okay. And we'll just upload that. Yeah, it was working so well the other day. I must have done something trying to like clean it up and make it pretty. Ended up breaking stuff. It happens. Oh well. Beans. All right. While this flashes, we'll take a quick look at the mix edit menu I was referring to before. Yeah, with channel mix editing, normally you would do, you can see here, I've got a menu multiplier item edit little macro I made, and basically it just makes each edit color becomes this line with the right component. So up to 6 components if you have 6 steppers, and basically you can just edit them directly, and when you do edit them, nothing happens until you commit it, and so that's what the final commit vtool commit command does. It's a little weird, but I kind of can't get around it unless you had it timeout and then commit on the timeout, which would be a little weird, or you really don't want to commit it until because it'll mess up the collector. I think it does. It may leave the collector alone. So it's a possibility that I could commit and yet leave the collector alone, and you would just keep whatever you had. So that's an interesting possibility. I might look at that and see what the result is. So, okay, I think we're probably almost, wow, it's still building? It's taking forever. Okay, so, so here again, if you have a dual mixing extruder, then you have the option to edit in with just a simple single value, and that's what is shown here. You have your print the value that you're editing, and then as it actually does all the manual editing here with the encoder position, figures out what they should be, and basically just prints it on the screen. And if you don't have either of those, if you don't have a direct channel mixing, and you don't have a dual mixing extruder, it just skips on and goes, sorry, all you can do is go back. So I don't know if that'll ever happen. Probably not, so it's just there in case. And as a kind of a placeholder for future possible ways of editing. Toggling the mix, of course, in the case of a 2-channel, you toggle rather than cycle the mix, so that's why that exists. You can just go from 100-0 to a 0-100, and that's it. Toggles back and forth. Finally, go to mix edit is there for the cases where we need to do this first. Prepare the collector before doing the edit. See, that's important. And then go to the mix edit screen and at the same time call it. So this just prevents a delay. It allows it to draw more quickly. Otherwise you'd have to wait a little longer for the mix edit screen to come up. So that's all that does. Reversing the gradients, similar idea. Just switch the vtools that you have. T1 to 0, they get swapped. As for resetting all the virtual tools, we have a menu item for that now, so that's there. Then there's also, of course, do you want to? It actually does force you to confirm. So that's what that is, a confirm dialog page. Then you have your menu mixer itself, and this is where all the items appear. And so there's one for the active tool. Edit that. You can edit different tools. Then you can either edit the mix directly or using the methods that we described earlier. And here again, add-ons. So this add-on actually draws the whole item. There's no menu item before it. It just, that doesn't draw, it's just a function. So it draws toggle mix, and then I think it shows, yeah, it shows this mix here. So if I go to my mix, I should be able to see that. Toggle mix, so yeah, there it is, toggle mix, and sure enough, it does work. Yeah, update mix from vtool. Yeah, mix, it says the word mix, and then it says, yeah, so this stuff here, right here, actually goes with this menu item. So that's why this is an add-on. This gets printed to go with this menu item here. So just taking a quick peek at that. And then reset vtools is there. Sure enough, it is. Yep. Confirm or reset. Back, please. Yep. And gradient goes from T0 to T1. If I change it to 2, now it says gradient T0 to T2. Let's go to 1. So I did have it print on the screen inside of the gradient item. That's what this is. It says, hey, here's the gradient, and by the way, it's currently tool 1 to tool 2, or whatever it happens to be. And then there's an option to reverse that. Simple enough. And sure enough, it does update the screen. Right, and that's that. That does that. Okay, so all these are working. So the one thing we're seeing that isn't is M166, the movement of Z, and all that. So we have now flashed it, and now we can do some debugging. Let's do a quick debug. Let's see what I did here. So I'm going to put aside this command, this one, A0Z20I0J1. Just copy this over here so I can remember to use it. Okay, so you'll notice right now it's updating this because of the screen. So now let's put in my command. Okay, what did we get? Turn off auto scroll. So we got gradient mix on, start mixer, update mix from vtool, vtool 0 to mix 100, blah blah, Z0. Okay, so some of these things like this update mix from vtool here, I think I'd probably hide that because it just gets in the way. I think I might have to do something like this. Just to make it fit nicer into everything. So that shouldn't take too long to upload. So have we seen everything we care about here? The menus are there. It's fairly straightforward. It is in its own file. Thanks to Marlin 2, we do have separate files for each of the menus, which makes it a bit neater. Here's some extra macros I added so that I could use the same code between the two, basically for the menu item add-on stuff, which has been sitting around waiting for a while to get used. So the code that adds that isn't actually here in this PR, it's in an older one. I think we're ready. Uploading, okay, uploading. So anything else important here? I do keep track of the float position when using the gradient. There's a little option in the planner to do that. Here I'm just doing a little optimization where, this is going to get converted automatically, so I don't really have to specify the type. And that's pretty much it. A little Travis test to see whether it'll work. And everything else is just config changes. So yeah, very simple, right? Just a bunch of numbers that get applied to the mix in real time. So now let's see, now that we've flashed, let's see what we get. Boom. All right, stop that scrolling. So here we turn it on start. vtool is 0, 128 to mix, end vtool 1 to mix. Current Z is 0, 0 out of 100. Okay, now let's do a quick G28, just to make things neat. And once again, just make sure that's on, or let's check and see if it's on. I think I should probably turn it off when homing, huh? but it is still on. All right. Well, let's just double check that it's definitely on. Okay, and then if I say G1 Z10, here's where we get the clue. What happened? Z equals 10, mix 50-0 gets changed to color 128-0, so that's clearly wrong. It should be 50-50. So I think what happened was my math got a little messed up here. So let's go see what's going on with that. Okay, so gradient control. Let's just start from gradient control and work our way up. If z, etc., update gradient for z given the current z. Okay, and we do have that z. Then we have update gradient for z. If z is the previous z, return. Otherwise, the previous z equals the z. Well, here's where it would be good to know whether the z changed. It's like, I see that it does say mix to color, but that's within, I believe that's within the gradient control method. Or unless I'm mistaken. No, indeed. That is being printed from... Right, it's being printed from update mix from the V tool. Interesting. Update, or no, is it mix to color? Yeah, interesting, okay. Yeah, so it's being copy mix to color. Copy mix to color. So is this where it gets screwy? Well, we could try doing it a little differently here. Take the larger of the two and multiply by... Interesting. Well, I should see where it's screwing up first. I want to say I did these changes to the color A mask, and I feel like they might be involved. But with the to try and save on some calculation, so I can always go back and see what that gives us. Like for example. Just see if that does anything. I don't know what that will do, or whether I even need to do that. But that used to be what it was. Let's take a look and see if there's something else going on. Okay, mix. Now we noticed that mix 1 was 0 instead of it should have been 50-50 instead of 0. So why did it end up being, what it was? And was it that before we did this reciprocal stuff here? Well, yeah, I guess it must have been. So let's see where that's called. Update vtool from mix. We don't care about that. That's not where it was happening. Where else does it happen? Well, clearly it happens here inside of this. So this is getting called. Otherwise we wouldn't see it. So what's going on with that? Mix equals, okay, so start mix, end mix, times percent. Okay, I'm seeing, that looks like it ought to work. So this is where I should probably print out what the mixes are. I believe I have it pretty well settled here. Yeah, they are. Yeah. It's interesting. Update mix from vtool. let's take a look. Update gradient from Planner Z. Mm-hmm. Well, this is where the error would be, right? So let's take a look. Mm-hmm. Okay, so start, end, and see if we get something good out of this. What do you think? What do you guys think? Think it'll work? Anyone? Let's see. We'll just do our own debugging and not everything. We'll just look at what we want. What did I do wrong? It was working well, I swear. At the end of our last live stream, it was working pretty well. This is it's just one of those cases where coder does what coders do. Got to try everything, see what breaks, see what works. Yeah, so it's built, and come on, you can do it. All right, uploading. Yeah, so there are all kinds of ways that this could be done for sure. The M166 method is just kind of, it is again, it's emulating what Geeetech has done. It isn't necessarily the best way, obviously. There are many ways to approach it. I do like the idea of a virtual tool for the sake of slicers. That's really, so that'll probably be one of the tweaks that'll be made after or later. I don't know, maybe I'll do it before. It would be nice to be able to migrate to 2.0 on your A10M and your A20M like soon, but I would like to have it kind of working the way that it ought to be working. So we're all on the same page. Okay, there we go. Yeah, you see that? It says gradient controls equals 10, but then it never seems to get to where we want it to go. So what's going on with that? Z equals 10, if it's enabled. then we should be calling update gradient for Z, right? And that should be doing this. Here's where I think this is where we're getting into our issue here. Yeah, it really should be printing this no matter what. I mean, clearly it should be. So what the heck is going on here? Why is it not being updated? So this is my new addition, so let's take this out and let's just see if that's got anything to do with it. Or, you know, we could add this too, I suppose. Right, like why would it be the same Z in any case? Is that what's really going on here? What could it be? That is called from someplace. Yep. That's called from someplace. It's very strange. We know that the gradient is enabled. I think we do. It says on, so it must be. Almost done. There we go. Yep. That's peculiar. Alright, so it does now print this. Mix 0, start 100, end 0. Mix 1, start 0. Ah, see, this should be 100. So why does it say 0? So that's what's going on, or that's part of what's going on. So none of that same Z stuff. Look, same Z. Okay, so yeah, the end is 0, 0, so that's the reason why that's behaving so strange. Why is it that? Is the question. How did the end up being what it is? Right, so again, end mix, start mix, end mix. Did I modify gradient in some silly way? No. Still start VTool, end VTool. Okay, good. So something about the end mix is funky. Yep, sure enough. So even though it says end Z20 T1 current, okay. Let's see where end mix is updated. Not in a lot of places, as you can see. Yeah, so we do copy the mix, and we do copy from end VTool, so maybe this is where it's happening here. Gradient end VTool. And we know that the end VTool is this, 0, 100. And end mix should be equal to what is here. So this is where we need to look at what's going on. Okay, well. We'll just stick that on there. That way we only have to look at it with that one spot. I wish I knew why. It should be something bloody obvious, you would think, but I guess not. What do you think? What do you think? No, no, Dave. I'm muting you right now. I'll be with you later. Okay, so it has now started to write. Good. I was going to say flashed, but no. Slow as hell. What is left here? Almost there. Okay, finally. Okay, good enough. Okay, it does do the correct conversion according to this. Interesting. But yet it still considers the end to be 0. So it's still getting 0 from the end. That is peculiar. Okay. Let's take a look at what our copy method. Surely, oh. Yeah, there's my problem. Yeah, that's my problem. I did this for all the rest, but I forgot to do it here. I think that's something like that. Mixer stepper loop, right? Yeah, this is, I had this problem before, so I don't know why I completely spaced on the fact that I had, but I did. Alright. Okay, so that should do it, right? Okay. That's all it is, I'm sure. That was silly of me to forget that. Okay, so we don't need that. We do need that. We don't need that change. We don't need that. I think all these are going to continue to work. that. We also don't need nor this, nor this, but this, yeah, all this stuff stays. Okay, debugged. Right? I'm just assuming, obviously. I'm just being lazy because I want to eat my dinner. This is not going to be a long live stream. This is just to get caught up and give a review of what the feature entailed. And as you can see, it entailed a lot of changes scattered around, but it's not unusual for an integrated feature like this to get things scattered around. I keep lamenting the fact that you can't just drop a folder in and have a new component in Marlin. That would be really neat, but C++ does not make that easy. You could, for example, have placeholders for features that you could drop in, and it could find those, but there's no option in C++ to be like, try to include this file, and if you don't, just ignore it and carry on. If you can't include something, C++ tends to throw an error, and it's not easy to do certain types of things where look for that folder. With C# you could do it a lot easier. If you've worked with that language at all, it can be pretty impressive. Let's see, did I get rid of my extra changes? I did. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do here is just push these up to the interwebs, to the GitHub. And the way I typically do that is like this. Oops, I don't really want to push everything up. I just want to push up everything up to this one, gradient mix with M166. But I have a command for that. QPQ. I'll just QPQ it. I just quick push, quickly, something. I don't know what it stands for, but basically goes back a few commits and push that instead. Okay, so here we are with, once again, gradient, as it is. Oh, failed to upload, jeez, because I left that debug flag in, derp. Right, let's quickly fix that. Yeah, all good? Okay, good. Voila. Okay. I keep wondering what people 100 years in the future are going to think of the way we do things. We do this now. All right, almost there. Yes, we used to have to type code in by hand. Sometimes there would be the errors. I know, right? Okay, and finally, we are uploaded. Let us now do our proper test. That's what I get for trying to be too clever again. When will I ever learn? Okay, let's get our M166 prefab command. Type it in, there's our mix. And oh my god, it's working. Look at that, it's 50-50. Okay, back to where we were. So anyway, it's downloadable. As you see, I pushed it up to the server already, so you can get the fixed version now. But yeah, other than that, I think that was it. Everything else seems to be good. Now the long-term question is going to be whether to keep it in this form, or probably not, or to extend it and make it into a virtual tool of some kind. And how is that going to work? You know, if you're on the virtual tool and within the range of the gradient, what happens, and what happens when you're outside the range of the gradient while you still have the gradient tool selected? Does it revert to the previous tool you had selected? Or are you forced by, you know, to just pick another tool? Would you pick another tool anyway? You know, if you were, say, slicing a model, you get the gradient done, you're going to go to another tool anyway. You know, so I think that's probably what I'm going to add before I do the merge, will be some kind of support where you can do a tool select and it will turn the gradient on, just as an option, at least so that that is available for your slicer. But I don't think I'm going to go to the trouble of trying to make it formally act like a virtual tool in the way that all the other virtual tools do. I'm probably just going to make it a special option, because, you know, what virtual tool would it be? How would you create them and assign them? Do you really need multiple ones? I mean, set up ahead of your print. I feel like you don't. You can do it as you're going along and it would be fine. So, I don't know. We'll see how that works. Maybe I'll do an option where it's like T1 will call M166 and try to parse the parameters or something. I don't know. But, or T100 or something. I'm not exactly sure yet, but however it works, it's going to be compatible in some way to make it so that you can make your white tower and get cleaner gradients. Other than that, I can't think of anything super important in it. It does what it does, you know, it very gradually changes the mix. It's not going to give you absolute perfect gradients. It's not going to go on every layer and do a perfect purge. But if you do have a purge tower, you are going to get probably cleaner looking gradients as a result. So yeah, it's all going to depend on how you're using it, what you're using it for. One thing I did find, I printed the dog model that comes with the system, and I went from black to white. And do I have the model here? It's somewhere, but anyway, it's like all black, and then only a tiny bit of white is visible at the top. And of course, the reason being that black as a color is just overwhelming. It really overpowers the white, and so even a little black makes it black. And so you really need to think in terms of, you know, do you want to go from 100% black to, you know, 100% white, or should you start at like 25% black and go to 50% white? And, you know, there are different ways to approach it, and you're going to encounter the same kinds of situations with any color you use. So, you know, in the long term, maybe it makes sense to have a way to weight the colors so that it will only it'll mix them in as much as they have an overall influence. And I'm curious to see how the M3D ends up, you know, handling that kind of stuff. So anyway, I do have some food going here, so I'm gonna have this really awesome dinner that Lou made, and then I'm gonna play with this some more. But I'll have the link to the actual pull request and the branch in the description. It should be there already, I think. And if not, I'll add it. But yeah, so, you know, go grab it, give it a try, see what you think, play around with it. We'll make mods, you know, as needed, and, you know, see if it, the main thing is I just want to make sure that these A10Ms and A20Ms are working nicely with Marlin 2, and then, you know, we'll go from there as far as the enhancements and making it more, you know, compatible with everything and making it better. So yeah, anyway, thanks everyone for stopping by, and I didn't have a lot of time to answer questions and stuff, but I'm totally in code space right now, so I just want to keep up with this, but I'll catch up with you guys soon. check all the links in the description. I've got, send me a coffee if you want. I might make it so you can do tipping on this YouTube platform too. We'll see. Whatever they require. But yeah, just let you know things are going pretty well here. There it is. The tool changer is like very exciting. I'm going to definitely be posting content about that as we go. It is just, it's coming together well. Like having a hard time, like, where is it? Oh, there it is. There it is. Look how small it is. It's very heavy. It's a big piece though. It's like just the heaviest, densest, most rigid machine you've ever looked at. The tool changing, like putting it together, really gives you some insight into how well it's put together, and it's a really nice machine. I'm going to enjoy using it, and especially getting Marlin to run on it with all of its fancy features. So I'll post more about that as it happens. So anyway, good night everyone, and I'll see you next time.